They're coming in much faster this time. I can't hold them.
R2 trying to increase the power.
Hurry up, Luke. Wait!
When it comes to the film industry, Star Wars changed everything, wiping away all that came before and firmly moving cinema into a new era. An era that we're arguably still in today. The way the story was constructed, the way the film was made, and the way the film was marketed are still being imitated in the 21st century. So how can it be that with all our modern advances in filmmaking, that a movie released over 40 years ago can still be so important?
Uncle Owen,
Yeah?
this R2 unit has a bad motivator, look.
1977 was an interesting time for cinema. Films were low in spectacle and focused more on the characters rather than the set pieces. The Godfather, The Exorcist, and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest were some of the biggest films of the 70s, and they were all smaller in scope and anchored by the well-developed, multi-layered characters. But with Star Wars, everything changed. It ushered in the first era of the blockbuster in American filmmaking, beginning the move towards the studio-dominated landscape of cinema in the 80s. It was also released years before the first modern computers became widely available.
The Amstrad 8256 word processor and computer comes with a monitor, disk drive, and printer included. From around $1,099, it's leaving the future of typewriters up in the air.
Almost all of the special effects, be it the X-Wings approaching the Death Star, the lightsabers, or even the floating ball Luke uses to train with, were done practically. All of the sets were hand-built. There were real people inside R2-D2, C-3PO, and Chewbacca. The quality and sheer amount of practical effects done on Star Wars is crazy when compared to today's CGI-dominated industry. Back in the 70s, you couldn't just change the location of a scene or generate a character's entire outfit after filming. These things needed to be carefully planned and then physically made before the cameras even arrived on set.
Everything's perfectly all right now. We're fine. We're all fine here now, thank you. How are you?
Star Wars released when the Berlin Wall was still standing firm. It was released before Reagan was elected president. The ashes of the Vietnam War were still hot, and Mao Zedong had only just died. The world in 1977 was entirely different to the world today. Yet the Star Wars franchise is still enjoyed by millions across the globe. It was after the successive release of Jaws in 1975 and Star Wars 2 years later that the blockbuster was truly born. Such films were characterised by fast-paced, exciting entertainment that encouraged conversation outside the theatre, and then this buzz would persuade repeated viewings and more people to see the film. The stories were very simple, with clear protagonists and antagonists, and the motivations were external rather than internal. This wasn't the case for movies before this in the 60s and 70s. Instead, they were mainly musicals or smaller scale independent films, and there was much more overlap between the reception at the box office and the reception at the awards circuits. While it's true the original Star Wars saw extensive acclaim come awards season, winning 6 Oscars as well as being nominated for both Best Picture and Best Original Screenplay, a defining characteristic for blockbusters going forward would be limited success at the awards season. This is plain to see today. While awards in the technical categories such as Best VFX or Best Sound Design are relatively common for blockbusters, it's rare to see any success beyond this, despite the fact they dominate the box office and almost every cinema screen is showing one of these blockbusters.
And the winner is John Mullo for Star Wars.
Star Wars set a new record for the worldwide highest grossing film of all time. As a result, many Hollywood producers wanted to follow up on this success, greenlighting increasingly larger budget event films with wide commercial appeal and relying on extensive marketing campaigns leading up to their release.
How far are you going?
About 30 years.
One of the key characteristics of the film industry after Star Wars is the presence of franchises. Most of the blockbusters released in the 80s have had some kind of follow-up. While it's true The Empire Strikes Back isn't the first sequel ever made, with The Godfather Part 2 and the James Bond follow-ups being released years before, George Lucas's sequel was the first in the modern sense, featuring the same heroes, the same villains, and even ended on a cliffhanger. The Empire Strikes Back developed on what came before, and even laid the foundation for a further film in a way that simply had never been done before.
I'll meet you at the rendezvous point on Tatooine.
Princess, you'll find Han. I promise.
Chewie, I'll be waiting for your signal.
Take care, you two.
May the Force be with you.
Studios realised that continuing a pre-existing story does half of the marketing work automatically, and so franchises became the norm up until this day. Spielberg and Lucas originated as independent filmmakers, yet unknowingly moved the balance of power towards the studios. In recent years, the franchise has become even more dominant, with almost every release belonging to a pre-existing series, many reviving stories that first began in the era after Star Wars. The principles of blockbusters and sequels established by George Lucas continue to be perhaps the most defining feature of the state of cinema today. Another factor that pushed the industry to be more commercially orientated is the merchandise.
It's Darth Vader, watch out! And he's got a lightsaber!
It's Kenner's Star Wars action figures, each sold separately.
Before his film released, George Lucas took a $500,000 pay cut in favour of retaining all merchandising rights. At the time, this was seen as a risky move, but it's more than paid off.
The new Palitoy Star Wars models in toy shops now. They're waiting.
IG-88, Bosk, Lando Calrissian, and other action figures each sold separately.
Be quick. Your action? Sure.
Yoda Puppet and the Force Lightsaber, each sold separately. Millennium Falcon from Kenner's Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back collection. Lando Calrissian and Han Solo, Ugnaught, and Lobot action figures each sold separately.
New Bespin Guard, new AT-AT Commander, new Imperial TIE Fighter.
Yoda, AT-AT Driver, and other action 7, Rebel Soldier, Imperial Stormtrooper, and Chewbacca action figures each sold separately.
From 1977 to 2012, more than $20 billion was made just from selling merchandise. This is much more than the net gross of all Star Wars films combined. Today you can find Star Wars content in almost any medium. A whole wide range of physical toys, action figures and lightsabers, but also extensive comic releases, video games, and an increasing presence of theme parks. It became clear that ticket sales are not the only way a film can make money, and as you would expect, studios raced to recreate this success. Following Star Wars, action figures became a highly lucrative market, with most major releases having some kind of tie-in merchandise to wring as much money out of the film as possible.
Nice swing. Yikes! All downhill from here, swordsman. You'll be sorry, Jones.
Tricky again, Toad.
When the studios began to reclaim their dominant position over the filmmakers, naturally their only concern was to squeeze just so much money out of the films they owned. While Star Wars and Jaws may have began this movement in the film industry, it was in line with a larger economic trend at the time. The 80s saw the West embrace capitalism to a much higher degree. With the election of Reagan and Thatcher, the free market became even freer, with companies extracting as much wealth out of the economy as they could. The world became more consumerist. Companies pursued every avenue for profit. Malls sprung up across America and adverts flooded the TV.
Carnation, instant bread, walking regular and no sugar added. You're gonna love it in an instant.
However, this wasn't the only impact of Star Wars. It also changed the way films were made on a more technical level. Take away any of the monetary concerns, and it still stands as a pivotal moment in film history due to its advancements in visual effects and the reinvention of the sci-fi genre. Before Star Wars, special effects had not seen any real major improvements since the 50s, but the sheer number of high-quality effects marked a distinct leap forward in technical filmmaking. George Lucas created a boom in the market, with Industrial Light and Magic being started just to work on Star Wars, and it still stands as one of the key VFX companies today.
By photographing the model against a blue screen, it will later be possible to add different backgrounds and other moving objects to the scene.
The vast majority of the effects were practical, relying on extensive use of miniatures and costumes to create a truly detailed and lived-in sci-fi world that had never been done before. Industrial Light and Magic developed a computer-controlled camera rig to facilitate precise repetition of camera movement.
Walkers was shot on a specially developed camera. It's linked to a computer that remembers each move precisely so that it can be repeated as often as necessary.
As well as innovations in photography, so that far more of the film was captured per frame. The special effects supervisor John Dykstra essentially invented most of the techniques used to capture the action scenes of Star Wars from scratch, stating that he and his team essentially walked into an empty warehouse, sat on the floor and just worked out how they're going to do all this stuff. The list of films ILM has worked on is almost endless, and spans across multiple decades, from Back to the Future to Harry Potter to The Irishman, and so much more. Name a major film and chances are the company's been involved. They did eventually pivot to digital effects, similarly trailblazing new techniques as they did years previously with practical effects. As Star Wars created a boom in high-octane blockbusters, it also created a boom in the VFX technology needed to sustain these blockbusters. Audiences would come to expect a higher level of spectacle after Star Wars, and filmmakers were increasingly relying on special effects to achieve this spectacle. Entire new worlds and genres could now be realised on film in a way that simply had never been done before. The sci-fi genre exploded, creating environments and creatures more detailed than ever, and embracing escapism and merging with the blockbuster to become much more popular with general audiences. While the science fiction aesthetic had largely already been established with Star Trek and 2001: A Space Odyssey, Star Wars changed the type of stories the genre was telling. Instead of being concerned with discovering new planets or tracking humanity's development as a species, Star Wars told a very simple, easily relatable story. It's much easier to cheer at the Death Star exploding than the birth of the Star Baby in 2001. Star Wars made sci-fi more accessible for common audiences, using the space setting as more of a backdrop to tell a simple story of good versus evil, instead of musing on any philosophical concerns. This, combined with the advancement in VFX, allowed the genre to become more popular than ever, with numerous sci-fi films releasing across the 80s.
November 5th, 1955.
While today it's easy to look at Star Wars as just another mega franchise run by our Disney overlords, it's arguably one of the most important films ever made. While Jaws holds the title for the first blockbuster ever, it was Star Wars that proved it wasn't just lightning in a bottle. Its success could be imitated, and the entire structure of American filmmaking changed because of this, with most of the films being made today still relying on the same blockbuster principles and dependence of special effects that began with Star Wars. But back in 1977, no one really knew how important it would be. Even George Lucas didn't really have any faith in Star Wars. The only person who predicted its success was Lucas's friend and fellow director Steven Spielberg. He said that it would be the biggest movie of all time, and then everyone in the room laughed at him. But 45 years later, Star Wars is more popular than ever, seeing content in a whole range of mediums being released every year, and the likes of Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker and Han Solo are household names. Its impact cannot be overstated, and when it comes to the film industry, Star Wars truly did change everything.